Where do I put the electrical panel on my boat? Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to Motor City Boat Werks. Today's episode is one that I've been wanting to make for a long time. I'm going to be talking about choosing a location for the electrical panel for my pocket trawler. As I've been working on the two cabins in the boat, I've started to kind of think ahead about what's going to be coming next and how I'm going to begin to start routing the plumbing and the electrical wires. And that brought me to start thinking about, well, where am I going to put the electrical panel? I had an idea that I would put it somewhere in the cockpit, but now I've started to reconsider. These are the original electrical panels for the Albin 27. This is how they came from the factory. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to refurbish and reuse these. I think there's probably something better made today that would be worth substituting for these, but I'm still not 100% sure. I'd like to keep one of the panels, especially the one that says Albin 27, because it just looks so authentic. Where the electrical panel is placed will directly affect, how the wiring is going to be run throughout the boat. So now the question is, where are we going to put the electrical panel? In the original Albin 27, the electrical panel was actually in two places on the boat. And it's a little unclear whether or not parts were added after the fact or it came this way from the factory. One part of the electrical panel was right here on this bulkhead. There was a piece of teak plywood that kind of went inside here. Of course, the countertop here was a plywood laminated thing with some Formica on top of it. So this sat basically like so. And you can see the cutouts. This is a cutout for an outlet here, and this was the cutout for one of the electrical panels. And if I recall, this I think was the 120, the AC 120. The DC panel for the boat, the battery switches were right here under the steps as you come down. And you can see this comes from the engine compartment. This is where the battery cables would have come to the battery switches. So in the original Albin 27, the head was much smaller and there was a hanging locker in this area right here. And the DC panel was either inside the hanging locker or kind of mounted on the side where the hanging locker itself, held the wires and what have you, kind of tucked inside there. But since we got rid of the hanging locker and now we have a large head and this area is the shower, well, you can't mount anything on this wall because the shower is immediately on the other side. And you can't mount anything here because this is the bulkhead that goes to the cockpit. There's no depth here, there's no space. So you can't put the DC panel there. And in fact, you can't put the DC panel anywhere inside the head. So we got to figure out where are we going to put it. Now I think on this side over here, we're actually going to put an air compressor that runs the air horn. This will be all navigation. This will be storage right here. There'll be the panel here for the engine controls and instruments. Some of them can go inside here. I'm not sure, but I think this space here is going to actually be where we end up putting the AC, alternating current, and the DC, 12-volt DC panels right here to be run right out of here. Now, one of my original ideas was to put the DC panel inside here. This is in the cockpit. It is a storage compartment inside one of the walls here of the hull of the boat. Pilot house attached to the top here, and this is the hull of the boat, and there's this cavity in here that's actually finished out. But the problem is, you can see there are deck fittings from the deck up here on top, and I have yet to be able to get them to be 100% waterproof. I don't know where the water's coming from. The fittings themselves are sealed, but if there's any water that comes on the deck and leaks through, well, it's somehow finding its way inside here. This was my original idea for where to put the electrical panel. I put everything, 120 volt, 12 volt, everything in one place on one giant kind of double panel setup inside this space. Are you enjoying the show? Well, do me a favor. Would you hit the like button and also subscribe? Spread the word about Motor City Boat Werks.
No BS, just boats and restoration.
But the problem with that is, of course, if there's any water that gets behind their electrical panel, well, that's a disaster. And also, this compartment, admittedly, is outside. It's in the exposed open part of the boat. It's in the cockpit. The cockpit can't be secured like this cabin can or the aft cabin can. So I don't really think that's a great place to put it. Although I like how much depth there is in there. I like the accessibility. You know, I like how it's all enclosed and everything, but it's not the right place. What I think is this is the place to put the panel. But it's a tight fit, and there's not a lot of room here. And more importantly, there's not a lot of depth. Of course, we're going to replace this piece. We'll replace this with something else, but even if you use something better, there's just not much room. This depth here is somewhere around 2.5, barely 3 inches, and it's just not a lot of room. In addition to, this is the galley, and this is the top of the ice box. Although I won't have an ice box, we're going to turn that into storage. The sink is over here, so you would be approximately 18 inches to 24 inches away from the galley sink, which might be okay. I don't know. And, but mostly it's about coming up with space inside here to do this. So a lot of people put the panel here. A lot of people put the panel in this location. They put their 12 volt and their 120 here. You could keep the battery switches where they're at. You could even have a sub panel, put it up top in the nav pod that I created to go in the upstairs. And that might be a great spot. You could at least break some of this down and not have everything right here. Yeah, I mean, we're at 2.25 inches depth, which is really not much. Now down here, same thing, 2 inches. If you did this like so, you could get as much as 4 inches, set it back like it was, you're at 2 inches. If you come up here, right here, you're at 1 inch. This is 2 inches right here. The most you're going to get out of here is 2 inches, probably, unless you figure out a way to bring this forward, which I don't know how you would do that. You could bring it forward like this. So this brings up another interesting thing. So this right here is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and it's kind of like a midships bulkhead. This piece of plywood comes down here and is this piece of plywood comes down here. It's this right here, and it comes across, and it's the midships bulkhead all the way across the head, right? Midships. It's one giant bulkhead. It was used as a stiffener in the hull, and it comes all the way down. Now, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure that this is connected to this. I'd have to look from the engine compartment. But in any case, this piece right here. Now, a thing you'll notice is that this is not connected to the deck at all, nor is it connected to this side over here. So what that means is in the original boat, if you had an AC panel here, this is not sealed from the engine compartment, okay? It's open. And you might say, oh, that doesn't matter, but it does. Take a close look here. Can you see the light inside there? See the light? See that light back there? See that light back there? That is an opening to one of the side air vents on the side of the hull for the engine compartment, right? The engine compartment needs to be cooled and it needs to have oxygen. So there are two large air vents on each side of the boat amidships in the hull at the engine compartment, up high. Now, what that means is that one of the reasons that the Albin 27 is not a blue water boat, could not be a blue water boat, is that they put those air vents on the side of the hull. And if the boat takes serious water, water will go inside those vents and it will go down in the engine compartment, and you can technically flood the boat. You definitely could do that. And they can't be closed off because you got to have air for the engine compartment. You'd have to come up with a whole nother way to provide air for the engine compartment and cooling. And but for coastal cruising, it's perfectly all right. Okay. But in any case, I don't want the back of my electrical panel exposed to water or potential moisture. And that's the reason we're not going to put it out here in the cockpit in this area. I think we've got to put it in here, but now it means I got to figure out how to close up these gaps and perhaps create some more depth behind here for the electrical panel. All right, so what I'm thinking of doing, and this is a crazy idea, but what I'm thinking of doing is this piece is not attached to anything. See, it's not attached to anything here. So it's not doing any structural duty here other than maybe making this side rigid over here, because it is affixed here and it does go back another 2 inches to the hull. It seems like it's glued in place. So this is what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is you cut this off. You cut this, you cut that. This board, this is a 3/8 inch piece of plywood. This comes out, and now you open this up. Now you have at least You have at least 6 inches from this to the inside compartment out here, okay? The back is accessible from inside the engine compartment. You can look up inside there. And what I would do is create a box, a 3-sided cube, right? A box. And, you know, it would go out and come up. The sides would be sealed. It would be a box. And then when you put the facing on here, you could have the panel and it would mount flush right against the box. You'd have a watertight electrical panel back box, and the panel can be opened up if you ever had to work on it. That I can find there's no ABYC codes that say the electrical panel has to be a certain distance from the sink. You can buy electrical panels that are waterproof. They can go outside, so that's not an issue. Everything will be protected. No one will ever touch this coming up and down the cockpit. No one will touch it when they're working on the dishes here. This is just counter space. It'll be just like you see on a sailboat, an electrical panel that's sitting off to the side. Because we're not going to have a top open for an ice box because we have a refrigerator. This is going to just have a hard top. It has a solid surface countertop comes across here. And what I was going to do was put a shelf inside there and have a hatch right here so you can open this up and store inside there. What do you think? That's my plan. But it's a little bit of a construction job to try and figure out, to get in there and whack this thing. I need to look at it from the engine compartment and see whether this can be done. That's my plan.
I've been wanting to show this episode because in addition to it being about where to put the electrical panel inside the Albin 27, I think this episode is also about the moment you identify a problem and then have to try and come up with a solution. You've seen a lot of the projects that I've done working in the boat shop, and I know they kind of appear to be kind of resolved fairly easily inside of a 20-minute episode. This is the very beginning of how I'm going to put the electrical panel inside the Albin 27. And you can see there's a lot of questions. What do I do? And where do I go from here? We're not done. Would you do me a favor? If you enjoy this channel and you enjoy these episodes, please, you can help me out. We have one remaining goal for the channel, and that's to reach 4,000 hours of viewing. We're at about 2,000 right now. We're halfway there. If every subscriber took a moment to watch the Albin 27 playlist, we would have more than enough hours and we'd reach our goal. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Stay motivated.